Now I'm going to be talking about the components of the communicative competence. This competence has four components that are the linguistic competence, the social linguistic competence, the discourse competence, the strategic competence. I'm going to be explaining to you each one. And first we have the linguistic competence. The linguistic competence can be defined as the knowledge of the language code. For example, its grammar and vocabulary. As an example, when you are writing an essay, if you have the correct orthography, if you are having a good grammar, if you are using the correct vocabulary about the topic you are talking about, and the grammar is going to become with some more components, and we start with the phonetics. The phonetics are the knowledge of the sounds and the pronunciation of the sounds. Then we have the phonology. The phonology are going to be the rules that govern the sound interactions and the patterns. Then the morphology is how the words are going to be formatted, the formation of the words. This means also the inflection and derivation of the words, the roots of the words. Then we have the syntax. The syntax are the rules that govern the combination of the words and the phrases to structure some sentences. And the semantics, that are the meaning through the language. So we can conclude that the linguistic competence is the rules, the grammar, the vocabulary. For example, which words you are going to say, the structures of the language, the correct rules, the code, to have the correct grammar, the correct vocabulary. That is the linguistic competence. Then we have the social linguistic competence. The social linguistic, as the name says, is the knowledge of socio-cultural rules of use. For example, to know how to use and how to respond to the language in an appropriate way. This means that it's going to be depending on the settings of the communication that you are having in that moment, in that context. The topic that you are using, the relation among the people you are communicating in that moment. For example, as I said before, you are not going to be using the same vocabulary with your friends and then with your teachers. It's a different person, it's a different context. Moreover, it's going to be depend of knowing also the taboos of other culture if you're in a foreign country, the politeness, and how you're going to be expressing authority, friendliness, courtesy, or irony. It's going to be depending. So the social linguistic competence, as a conclusion, we can say that is when you know in which context you are. If you are with your friends, if you are with your teacher, if you are with your boss, with your family, you know in which context you are, and that is going to have a derivation of what words, what grammar, what vocabulary you are going to be using. In the third place, we have the discourse competence. The discourse competence is the knowledge of how to produce and comprehend the oral or written text. For example, is knowing how to combine the language structures into something that has a coherent way to communicate your ideas. You are using the correct structure. The discourse competence is going to be dealing with the organizations of the words, of the phrases, and the sentences in order to create the conversations that you are going to have, the speeches that you are going to have, if you are writing an essay, if you are writing a poem, if you are writing an email message. That is the discourse competence, is when you know the structure that you are going to be following. And in the last place we have the strategic competence. This one is also, as the other ones, really important, because it's going to be the ability of recognize and repair communication breakdowns, for example, before, during, or after they occur. For example, if you don't know what to say and you stay quiet, you are going to be using the strategic competence because you are going to know what to say next. For example, also, if the speaker doesn't know a certain word, that's when the strategic competence comes, because the speaker needs to think quickly what is going to say. So, for example, also, if you're having a conversation in in a restaurant with your friends, and there's lots of noise, and that's going to be really interfering into your speech, into your chat, and that's when the strategic competence is going to be used, because the speaker must know how to keep the communication channel open. The speaker needs to know how to deal with some external factors as noise, as if he is going to have a breakdown, as if he doesn't know the word, as if he misunderstood the message of the other person. The strategies are going to be used, and for the strategies we can use for example, the repetition, the clarification, a more slower speech, a more higher speech, or we are going to be using gesture, or taking turns into the conversation, giving time to each one. So, as a conclusion, these 4 components of the communicative competence should be really respect when we are learning, when we are teaching, and are going to be really immersed into the communicative competence. And as a conclusion of the whole topic, we can conclude that the communicative competence really have an important place when we are going to be talking, when we are learning to speak. Why? Because it's going to be compound of everything, of the grammar, of the knowledge, of the correct speak, of the correct words, of the correct pronunciation, and all that stuff. So the communicative competence is a really, really important step into language, in learning, in teaching, and we really need to keep in mind that this competence exists, and that this competence, all the components of this competence, that's all for this topic, and thanks for listening.